Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Tyre Straits podcast. This is the Motorsports podcast that is hosted by two people that really are not qualified to be discussing what we have to discuss. I am the first of the aforementioned, Scobbert, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Doots.
Yes. Now, we are week in, week out, giving the rundown on Formula One and motorsports more generally. But with every Formula One race that comes around, we'll be covering that in a bit more depth. So next week, tune in to find out what happened and our opinions on the Japanese Grand Prix. But enough on that for now. We just have a few little bits to go over, and then we can get into the main topic of today. What is said topic?
Oh, well, essentially, because we've had a bit of a week off from Formula One, we had to fill the gap with something to talk about. And with China, the previous race being a sprint race, I thought we'd have a discussion about what to do for sprint races. Well, like how we're going to change them, why there are issues, and what are these problems that we can see in how they're run or how enjoyable they are, and stuff like that, and how we might fix them.
Yeah.
In numerous ways, and these are just discussing potential changes. We're not saying that all of them need to be implemented.
No, and there will be, just a sort of disclaimer ahead of time, there will be some devil's advocacy at times. Just because we're saying some things doesn't necessarily, or like bringing up some points, it doesn't necessarily mean they're what we're suggesting or what we agree with. And at the end, after we've sort of discussed things, that's when we'll give our own individual verdicts on the matter. But just before we get into that, a bit of news come out of the Formula One paddock in the last week. After obviously a tumultuous start to the season, Aston Martin have had a bit of a reshuffle of their personnel. We're seeing Adrian Newey, who is the current team principal, stepping down from his duties and being replaced by Jonathan Wheatley, who has just left Audi. What do you make of this, might I ask?
I personally, I don't think it's the worst idea to have Newey step down, realistically. The fact that he was brought in as team principal, I personally think is a bit of an odd one, because he's, for his entire career has basically been on the technical side of things, and is one of the best for the technical side of things. So making him have to deal with all of the actual, running the team and everything like that, it kind of gives him less time to work on the car.
Yeah.
I'd imagine. So I don't think it's that bad of an idea. The strange one for me is Jonathan Wheatley as a replacement. I'm not certain what went on there, because I've heard two things, essentially. That either one, there was disagreements between him and Mattia Binotto on the dual running of the team, of which Binotto is now the new principal, and the other one is simply just that Aston offered a hefty sum of money to get Wheatley to move across, and both of them are reasonable.
Yeah,
so it could be anything.
I can definitely see a good case for the latter, just given the fact that I don't believe I said it on the podcast, but ever since it was announced, I kind of maintained that I don't think Adrian Newey was going to be a very good team principal. Obviously, like you said, he's never been involved with that side of things, like running the team day in, day out. And I did kind of just think he'd drown a little bit. And I think it's good for both the team and for him to step down. He's not leaving the team, just to clarify. He's basically just sort of reduced himself back to the role he was initially kind of brought in for, which was, I believe, Chief Technical Officer. So he's still going to be in charge of the car design, things like that, and the development. But it just means that now that's his sole focus. He's able to keep his eyes on what matters most. And I think there were also possibly some internal disputes within Aston and with Honda. Newey was a bit scathing at times about Honda and the power unit, and obviously Honda vice versa with Newey's car design and demands. But, with not as much known about that just yet, obviously it's only speculation. So I guess time will tell on the reasoning.
I would say that Honda and Newey have their they're fair reasons to be annoyed at each
Oh
other.
yeah, exactly. But I think
together they have not managed to provide a full package of a car that can actually finish
no,
a full
absolutely.
race in good time.
All I was trying to say by that is I think it's just better, basically. I think as an ulterior motive, not the main reason for the switch, but an ulterior motive is also just like you get the kid that steps in between the two kids that are fighting, you know? There's a bit less direct conflict, and that means that there should be a bit more of a harmonious relationship between Honda and Aston.
I just think it's better. You know, he is a technical guy at heart, and so it's much better having him solely in a technical role. I don't think the team principal idea was a fantastic idea, but adding him to the team most certainly was.
Yeah, and I think
assuming that the car can
be salvaged.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think playing him to his strengths is definitely the way to go about it. So let's hope that Aston can start putting some stuff together. But with that bit of news out of the way, not really much else to talk about in the world of Formula One. We can get into the meat and the veg of this podcast episode. So just before we start, you know, the sprint race, like the format, the concept, everything about it, is something that has been debated on for quite a while since it kind of was brought into the sport. So it's definitely, I feel like controversial is a little bit scathing of a word to use, but at the same time, I think it, in terms of the direct definition of it, it makes sense. So we're just going to quickly go through the sort of issues that people have with the sprints, discuss some potential changes to them, what, you know, might be a better idea, how to run them better without, you know, necessarily just completely scrapping them. And then at the end, like I said, we'll give our own sort of personal thoughts on things just to conclude on that. So do you have anything to add before we get into it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's like sprints are controversial, but I would say that they are just such a weird case.
Yeah.
Because it's the fact that so many people complain about them and say there's no point of them being brought into the sport and saying all these different things, but everyone still watches them. And like so many more people are going to watch a sprint than 2 extra free practice sessions, and you get so many more people showing up to like the event live. So it's one of those where everyone kind of universally says they don't like it, but then feeds into it and watches it anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that can take us quite easily into the first sort of point of discussion with the sprints, which is that if people didn't watch them, they wouldn't exist. Obviously, that's a very simple one to unpack, and it basically ties to what you say. The sprints are obviously more marketable, I guess. You know, there's more interest in watching racing than there is in watching cars going around track for practice. What's your kind of takeaway from that kind of school of thought?
I mean, realistically, I don't consider that an issue with sprints. I just consider that it is more content. You know, that's part of any sport, part of any form of media at all, that if there is more to watch, people will actually watch it. And while you can watch free practice, it is nowhere near as interesting, generally, as something like a sprint races. I'd say that the main issues actually come from the sprint race, either the way it's run or the actual just full existence of it, which it's a really hard one to judge, because obviously there's other reasons than just people watch it for it to exist. You know, circuits get a lot more people to show up, as I've mentioned earlier. But at the end of the day, I still think like people would still probably watch free practice. Not as many people, but I don't know. I'm really not sure on that point. It's that like people would, if they didn't exist, like people would still probably watch free practice. Their existence definitely drives up viewership.
I think
it adds an extra quali session, which people will watch.
Their existence kind of is sort of, I don't want to say a consequence of, like, you know, sort of newer fans that are more interested in the racing and less interested in the actual sport itself. Because obviously, a lot of people sort of there's like at this point it's like a whole online bit where people sort of refer to other fans in the community as DTS viewers, as if that's the only place that they get any insight in the sport. And I do think that obviously the introduction of the sprint races came because Liberty Media was looking for a way to basically get more viewership on just generally. So I do think it's definitely a consequence of that kind of, just the reason for its existence is a consequence of that kind of idea of we need to push for more sort of interest and viewership. But at the same time, like you say, there's not really, it's more of a statement than a point of discussion. Like, if they never existed in the first place, they wouldn't, nobody would watch them anyway because they didn't exist. And I don't know if they're, it's hard to predict because I'm talking about a hypothetical, but I don't know that there would be a world in which people would start, saying, oh, I wish there was more racing in Formula One, So, yeah.
I mean, the simple way of comparing it is if you look to other race series that do have sprints a lot more, because with F1, and I'll get to this point shortish, but there's only a couple of sprints per season, which is really strange. And if you go and look at things like MotoGP and like Formula 2 and Formula 3, they have sprints every single race weekend. I mean, when it comes to Formula 2 and 3, there are less race weekends, so it's not as, it just means that there's more racing action. But MotoGP is like a 22 Grand Prix calendar, and every single one has a sprint beforehand. And they're all, people will tune in to watch the sprint, because it's great. There's only one qualifying for both of them, but it is essentially just a shorter race with different, you can push as hard as you want over this shorter amount of laps. And yeah, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But generally, it does bring in more people because it gives more purpose to that Saturday. Because, if you get people in for just, qualifying, you're still going to get people, undoubtedly. And you can sell the tickets cheaper so that there will be enough people. But if you're marketing it as both Saturday and Sunday have a race, you've instantly got more of a draw. And so that they, pull in more money from that, pull in more viewership. And certainly for Formula 1, you've also got an additional session on the Friday. So because of the sprint race, you now give people who don't really want to watch free practice a reason to tune in on Friday.
Yeah, I mean...
So
I was just saying, if you wanted to sort of segue into that point generally, that next point of issues with the sprints that people have.
I will move into that. It's essentially... over an F1 season currently, there are 6 sprint races, and Liberty Media, or Formula 1 media, have been pushing to add more, but at the moment there's 6, and they're really poorly distributed. There was, this year isn't so bad, but last year, in the first half of the season, just under the first half of the season, you had 3 sprints, and then nothing until the final 4 or 5 races where you had all the rest of them.
Yeah.
Which makes no sense, because it means that if you've got this special thing that is the sprints that you're trying to push as more action, people are going to forget about it if there's not one for ages.
Yeah.
There's a huge chunk of the year that there is no sprints, and so there's no there is no drive for interest in them.
And I think
which is strange.
I think that adds to the point that some detractors have as well, which is if they're with how much of a hiatus they sort of take, at least with like you say with last year's sprint layout format and layout in the calendar, people will just forget about them. Then they are forgettable races. They exist as just a bit of extra entertainment for people that wouldn't normally have the attention span to watch free practice.
Actually, that's an interesting question. Can you remember, one interesting sprint? I just thought of that.
No.
I'm trying to think of any sprint races that are actually kind of noteworthy, and I can't.
I think that there may be that point may hold some water based on that alone.
Possibly. In the fact that I can remember races that have had a sprint before them, but I don't remember the sprint.
No, exactly. Um,
Yeah,
not.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're
But
right.
yeah, yeah. But no, the distribution, it's too uneven. It's like 6 races in a 24 race calendar is too few for the sprint races to actually have an impact and
Yeah.
have like a presence. But also, you're either going to have to up the number of sprints, in which case there needs to be something changed about other aspects,
Yeah.
or you just need to bin them off. Having just 6, it's this middle ground where you kind of forget about them until it's all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, yeah, sprint race. And usually there's certainly for this year, it's better.
Yeah.
But I will say there is other issues with this year's
I, I, I,
selection of sprints.
I've got to say though, you're not like far off, because just to quickly chime in, like there'll be weeks with like an F1 weekend where I'll literally like wake up and go, oh shit, there was a sprint. Like I sometimes don't even notice, or I forget
Yeah.
that it's happening. Because for me personally, it might be because I typically have always worked at the weekend as well, so I've not had the time to always watch both the race qualifying and of course the sprint as well. So that may have an effect on it as well. I will just sort of say I may be clouded by that, but I have myself sort of never sort of noticed them on the calendar. Like obviously I know they're marked, but like I sort of go, oh, there was a sprint. I didn't.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it was for me with the race just gone in Shanghai. So yeah,
I mean, I will say for these earlier rounds, it is a little bit different for us. With us, if you couldn't tell from our voices, being from the UK,
yeah,
races like Australia, China, Japan are all quite like already early in the morning Grand Prix. And so a sprint race, which we're expected to watch and show interest in because it holds championship points that could be vital in a like close battle, is gonna be really early when usually it would just be like nothing. It would
yeah,
usually just be another free practice session, for example. It's
yeah.
like if
It's
on like Saturday, say for example, Australia
hmm,
was 4 in the morning for the Grand Prix. I was up for that, obviously, but the qualifying before that, on the day before, was the same time,
yeah,
roughly. I'm expected to it then the session before that, which was free practice 1, which I think was 1 a.m. roughly. That is when the sprint would be if it was at Australia. So
hmm,
I'm expected to get all the action going towards the championship. You're expected quite an early start or just a different time for a session you might not have been able to watch.
yeah,
Because even when it's not early in the morning, for like obviously bigger problem now and only a problem for like European viewers, but a bigger problem is if you're usually not around to watch
like
like
myself.
free practice 3 essentially, you're not going to be able to watch the sprint.
Yeah, it definitely is a good point, and obviously it's quite ironic for us as Brits to be complaining about the time of Grand Prix dates. I know, I'm aware. We're well aware, but
Well aware that everyone else in like places like the
hates
States and
us.
Oz and they hate us because we're
Or
complaining
they
that
have to get up at like ridiculous
it's
o'clock as
stupid
well.
o'clock in the morning
Yeah,
for like most of the races,
yeah.
and we
So
have like
like,
3 or 4.
but I do think, like you say, most of, at least historically, it might, with sort of the way Liberty Media has handled things, it might not be the case now. But historically, the viewership for Formula One has been predominantly in Europe, so it's no surprise that it caters towards a European audience. So for these earlier rounds, and obviously with the way they're doing the championship seasons now, where they are sort of staying in one continent or area in the world and then moving to the next, sort of in little sort of chunks. Not that that's at all a bad thing, given that obviously better for the environment. Anything you want to sort of add to that, but given that that's how they're doing things, it just means that like the first 3 races of the season are races that are going to be a lot harder for us to sort of tune into ourselves, at least live. Like, yeah, but just any sort of closing remarks on that sort of a distribution issue?
No, I'd say like that's about all I have to say.
Yeah,
The only other thing I'd maybe I'll talk about in the potential changes, but the actual based on like an issue from the distribution, I think it's just it's stuck between there not being enough to make it impactful and just not having them at all.
Yeah, I mean,
so something needs to change.
I just sort of still sticking to distribution, but not necessarily about timing, sort of within the calendar year. A point of I'd just like to quickly give context. I put out a sort of Reddit post basically asking people for their points of like what they'd like to see changed with the sprints or what issues they have with the sprints right now. And one of the ones that I sort of saw come up a few times was basically the distribution of tracks, which tracks are chosen for the sprints. Because it was sort of a valid point, was that there are certain tracks that are more suited to a sprint race, and they often kind of get sidelined in favour of tracks that are sort of going to make a bit more money depending on the part of the world they're in. So I do kind of agree with this point, you know, not to sort of spoil what I'm going to say later, but if you watched our second ever episode where we rated all the tracks, you'll know that both of us are not big fans of Miami at all, the Miami track. And that is one of the sprints this year, and the Miami track is, at the best of times, not the best for racing, let alone conducive to the sprint style racing, where it is that sort of, like you said earlier, you can push harder, you can sort of have a faster paced, more action filled battle. And, you know, when you've got other tracks that are more suited to like that kind of thing, that are actively on the calendar as well, you know, those sort of shorter tracks, like I think, you know, just to throw one in there, I think like a Red Bull Ring sprint would be great, because that's not necessarily one of the longer, sort of more winding tracks. It's got some good overtaking zones. It's relatively condensed. Something like that, in comparison, gets overlooked compared to a track like Miami, which, like I say, is not a great track in my opinion at the best of times, let alone when used for a sprint race. It just feels like we'd be watching a procession going around there.
So I'm pretty sure that the Austrian Grand Prix had a sprint in 2024.
I'll say 20. It was either 23 or 24. I can't remember exactly, but it did. And I think like you said though, I can't exactly remember going back to the sprints.
Yeah. Oh no, I don't remember the sprint in the slightest.
But I feel like it would. I think like just as I say, I pulled an example out of nowhere. Like I think Red Bull Ring would be a much better fit than some of the tracks, because like the other tracks that are on the sprint calendar after China and Miami are Canada with the like in Montreal. Then you have Silverstone, Zandvoort, and Singapore. So the mix is, you do still have, I will concede, like it's not an issue where they're sort of catering so much to the street circuits this time. Obviously, you still have Singapore and Miami in there, but like I think a track like Silverstone, and to a lesser extent maybe Montreal, is just a little bit too long and open for the sprint style, if that makes sense.
I mean, I kind of disagree. I think I'm the other way around on that one, where I believe that like Canada and the UK, like Silverstone and Gilles Villeneuve, should be pretty good on the whole.
Right.
For a sprint. I'm more concerned about Miami. Obviously, it's had a sprint that lasts like 3 years. Every time it has been boring because it's Miami. It's just not great for racing. China's had one since its reintroduction, and it's just been kind of neutral. Like, I don't know.
I can't remember. I just can't remember.
I don't even remember. I will say I remember this year's sprint, and just because of the battle between the Ferraris, but that's about it. And Antonelli's awful start. But my big concerns on the calendar are actually Zandvoort and Singapore as two tracks that don't really have great overtaking historically. Obviously, new regulations, so things could completely change.
Yeah.
But in recent times, since the sprint's introduction, they're two tracks that have not been good for Grand Prix racing, that nothing can really be done over a full race distance. So as such, making a smaller version of the same race at a track that no one can overtake, you there's no point. There is no point because what you've also done, and I will segue this into our next point,
Yeah.
is you've basically spoiled the race for us in less time. Because at a track like Singapore or a track like Zandvoort, the problem is if the same person is fast around a circuit and they're not able to overtake well in the sprint, yes, there's going to be tyre strategies in the main race and there could be a bit of chaos. But there certainly when it comes to Singapore, like if someone is fast, gets pole and wins in the sprint, what's to stop them from doing it in the main race? Because you're not going to overtake easily. Certainly not in recent years. I mean, they've added the extra DRS zone, which is now no longer DRS, but will probably be in a boost mode zone. Down. Oh god, what was it? It used to be like the square chicane.
I know the under the stadium. Yeah.
I don't remember what the name of the corners going into it are, I'm afraid. But it's, I don't know, it's just a strange choice to pick some circuits that have previously not been great for overtaking. I understand why they've done it for Netherlands, at the very least, with it being its final year on the calendar.
Right.
So it's extra viewership, it's extra time on track for the cars. Like, there is at least some purpose there, but I think Singapore is a very, very poor mistake. And taking it away from Interlagos.
Yeah, Interlagos, I think, is one of the that's one of the ones I would have said. I mean, produces a better sprint race. I mean, once again, I can't remember. I can't put any sort of evidence to my point, but no, I definitely think. I think 2021 comes to mind, but apart from that, like,
yeah, I don't remember 2020. I remember 2022,
right?
Because that was Russell winning the sprint. Because he then went on to win the main race.
Right. Yeah.
Which he
did.
Was alright.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So yeah, to sort of move things along, we can sort of come back later to like what tracks we might sub in or add, whatever. But if you want to move things along for us.
Right. The next point that we need to mention is that, for example, in the sprint race, you're obviously going to have less time to overtake. So there's supposedly less time for things to happen, crazy strategies to occur, stuff like that. As such, the top teams are always going to be at the top. And sprints not only have a reduced amount of points, but a reduced number of points. Like, as in number of points scoring positions. Yeah. It goes from down from 10 to 8, which there's already been plenty of arguments from people to increase the point scoring positions to 15 for the main race. But limiting it down to 8 means that without strategy, without technical failures, and without incidents, it's most likely just going to be the top 4 teams that just get more points.
Yeah.
So it means that anyone below that is going to be left out. Like
that's what I was going to add. It kind of just reduces the opportunities for the smaller teams to sort of find that groove and get into the mix. Because unless a driver, let's say, for instance, Oliver Behrman in the Haas, so far pretty impressive this season. Let's say he gets a really good sprint quali, and he gets to like P2, P3, towards the front of the pack. Even then, like, just with how sort of the different teams that run things and how, obviously we know the top teams run a lighter fuel load, a sort of very simple strategy. There's less going into it. The chances are he's just going to get passed by the faster cars. There's going to be less of a sort of driver-oriented kind of battle for positions, and more so just almost like just drivers doing effectively quali laps, just trying to stay ahead of one another.
Yeah. And I mean that's kind of the thing, is without for example, really good way of putting it is that last year's Chinese sprint, the top 4 teams got all but one of the positions. So all it did is provide more points to the top teams, widening the gap between anyone below.
Yeah,
which kind of it's just it makes it. I wouldn't say irritating. But I would say it kind of makes some of the hard work that smaller teams do to get those single points worth less
Yeah,
if that gap is just going to be inched wider by things like sprints. And I mean, there is the occasional time where someone could get a fantastic like sprint result, um, but that's quite few and far between, and a lot more of the
yeah.
time,
It's more often than not the teams that you expect to be there, even if some of the drivers sort
yeah,
of don't have the pace in the main race. They're typically going to be ahead during the sprint.
yeah. I mean, I remember like Ocon getting fifth in the Belgian sprint, I think it was last year,
Yes,
and
yeah.
I think off the top of my head, I think Stroll got fifth in Miami last year as well. But
Something like that,
Miami was,
yeah.
yeah, Miami was an odd one. Um, but on the whole, I just think that it gives more points to top teams way more than it actually provides anything lower down, and I think that makes it a little bit pointless besides widening the gap at the top or creating closer battle between the top teams.
Yeah.
It kind of just pushes a wider gap between the top and the midfield.
Mm. I
But
mean, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's definitely one of the, I think, the loudest criticisms as well. But before we sort of discuss well, not necessarily what we'd change yet, but what the changes that are sort of points of discussion for us. Before we get into those, do you have any more little things to add in regards to issues themselves before we get into how we fix them?
Main issues with the sprints. I mean, my only other like major issue that I can really think of is just that there is kind of no reason for them.
Yeah,
Like they create very like usually not as good racing action as the main race because they can drive flat out, but they don't have any strategy calls. It's rare that the race is long enough for there to be enough time for things like changing conditions to come into play, and they provide like minimal points. They don't count towards like major statistics on the whole, and realistically, they shouldn't. Like a sprint win should not count as anywhere near as high as a proper Grand Prix win. And because of the point distribution, all it kind of does is drive a wedge between the top and the midfield.
yeah,
So it kind of feels like it's entirely self-serving for Liberty Media. It's entirely just that more people will watch racing than they will practice sessions. I will say one good thing that I do like about a sprint weekend, and that is that there is only one free practice session.
yeah,
I'm quite firmly in the books of like 3 free practice sessions. It gives the teams an awful lot of time to plan everything and sort out strategy and everything like that. And I understand that it's all in the name of safety and data, and it's a precision sport. It's about getting everything as perfect as possible. But when you don't have that extra data, it does make it more interesting. You get
yeah,
a bit more chaos in the sprints a lot of the time because of the fact that teams don't have that extra data from the extra free practice sessions. And also, if the free practice session is raining, it's a washout. And so teams will be walking into the races with basically no data from this year, which I think it can be quite exciting sometimes.
yeah. I think that's probably one of the better benefits. But
You got anything else to comment on?
no, with that being said, let's get into some of the potential changes, the sort of points of discussion we've got here. Once again, just to reiterate one last time, these points that we're bringing up are not necessarily what we're suggesting ourselves personally, and we'll get to that at the end. These are merely just what we've kind of come up with as sort of maybe even just devil's advocate points, as well as what has been suggested to us on the Reddit post and also on our Instagram story, because we put a question out there. So yeah, trying to just engage with you guys as well. That's how we've got some of these suggestions. So if we start things off with one of the suggestions I got from that Reddit post. This was slightly less serious one, I think. But it's basically, I didn't get the name for the original poster of this comment, but they suggested a Le Mans style start, which if you don't know what that means, effectively the drivers start from one side of the track, the cars are lined up on the other, and they have to run to their cars at the sort of the wave of the flag or the start of the lights, which like I say, I don't necessarily think is something that we'll be seeing ever, considering that having drivers running across the track while then drivers that have got a better start are jumping in their cars and setting off.
Mm-mm.
And also, just, I don't think, not to obviously say anything about the person that commented this, but I don't think they quite understand just how much goes into actually getting into the cars these days. It's not as simple as, jump in the car, strap in and go. Everything, has to sort of fit the driver snugly. So there are parts of the car that sort of get removed to boil it down to its simplest, but parts of the car sort of are removed to make it more accessible before being replaced back in, typically by a member of the team, which sort of secures the driver nice and snugly within the cockpit and gives them plenty of cover. And then also the steering wheel has to be removed and then replaced. The harness is not just a simple seatbelt, so it does take quite a lot to get in an F1 car before you can even set off. And not only that, the cars themselves are typically started. There's no sort of ignition. There's no starter motor in an F1 car. They just are started by basically a sort of it sounds kind of crude, but it kind of is. It's basically a modern equivalent of the old-fashioned turn handle that you'd use to get the engine to turn over. So yeah,
Fair enough.
I don't think, like I say, I think that was probably a bit more of a joke entry anyway. But I don't think Le Mans style starts are something we'll ever see in Formula One sprints.
No, it's a fun idea in theory.
It's something that's funny to sort of daydream about.
To picture,
Yeah.
But I think obviously the fact that the cars are really complicated to get into and start, it's definitely not a realistic suggestion.
And even if they weren't, I feel like it wouldn't be long before you see a driver get run over or quite seriously injured.
Yeah, someone would trip and fall, and then everyone would have to swerve, and then there'd be a huge issue about it.
Yeah.
But
to move along from that to something a bit more serious, where would you like to take us next?
I would like to take us to quite possibly the one thing that everyone has suggested. You go look at every video, every podcast, every post on changing the sprints. Someone will have mentioned the reverse grid.
Yeah.
Mainly because it is used in Formula 2 and Formula 3 for their sprint races. Essentially in their sport, they take the top 10 in qualifying for F3 top 12, and they flip it around. So whoever comes 10th or 12th becomes pole position for the sprint. Whoever is pole position becomes 10th or 12th. And it does introduce some more action. It's quite good because of how close the fighting is. But there are definitely some issues with it. Certainly my personal opinion is that while the reverse grid does kind of bunch the pack up as the fast cars have to close in on everyone in front, it does kind of feel very artificial in the sense that you can then, for example, in Formula 1, in sprint qualifying, like in SQ3, you can then just do nothing, not set a lap. You will come 10th. You will then get pole for the sprint. So if you're someone in a lower down team who doesn't think you can do anything fantastic in the main race, you might as well start on pole for the sprint race. Or the other way around, if you're a team who knows you can climb through the field quite easily, or has the confidence to do that, you can just not set a lap, get a good sprint, clean house on that.
But qualifying.
And while that isn't the best idea to do, it is kind of something that teams could do.
It does open up that sort of window for strategy, yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on
it? So just before I sort of get into that, I would like to add, just on the Reddit post, user Rich32G suggested as well sprint races in reverse championship positions. So instead of doing a sort of separate qualifying session for the sprint, you have your existing free practice or whatever, and then instead of sprint quali, you have the second free practice, and then you just go straight to the sprint, which in this instance would obviously be, depending on what point of the season it is, you see maybe different drivers at the front, because the driver at the bottom of the standings is the pole sitter for that race. So I think that is also kind of fun as well. Maybe a bit less realistic than the idea of reverse grids are still doing a qualifying session and obviously still opening up that window for strategy. But I think reverse championship order definitely has a bit more of that entertainment factor, and I think if that's the window that sort of Liberty Media are going through and sort of the road they're going down, then I think out of the two, I think that one makes a little bit more sense. But generally, from a racing point of view, I think reverse grid, like the sort of F2, F3 kind of idea, I think is probably the better of the two in that respect. So yeah, one has better racing, the other has sort of better entertainment, and it entirely sort of banks on just what Liberty Media want from the sprint race going forwards.
What it would also mean is that there's no sprint qualifying anymore. It'd just be one quali session that decides both sprint and main race.
Yeah,
which might not be the worst idea, honestly.
No,
I think it's not. I mean, I've nothing against sprint qualifying, but it's not the most interesting. What I do like about it is the use of mediums. That they have to use a medium tyre, but it's the fact that they have to use mediums for the first two sessions, but not the third, which kind of just means that you get some weird changes in laps for the first two sessions, and then the third session is just the same as any quali session, which kind of takes away from it.
It's like they half baked the gimmick and then just kind of just went regular Q3 on the end.
Yeah,
which is a shame.
Right.
But yeah.
Next suggestion.
So the next one is basically reintroducing the way sprint races used to work. So before they existed in their current incarnation in an F1 season, the way a sprint race would work is basically, instead of having a sort of regular qualifying session ahead of the big race on Sunday, you would have the sprint race, and then the finishing order from the sprint would be the order for the GP. So you'd have the qualifying, but instead it was for the positions in the sprint. And then the sprint would basically give you the opportunity to move up or down the order, depending on how well you do, ahead of and then change your grid position for the main Grand Prix race. So what's your take on that suggestion? Do you prefer how it used to be compared to how it is now?
I'm kind of mixed on how it used to be. I do kind of like it because it does give the sprint
it's at least something different.
Purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more it gives it a purpose. It actually makes it feel like it ties in more to the racing, with the fact that where you finish is where you start, so it gives people a drive to do well in the sprint.
And I think, for example, just to quickly add on, I think that also would be better for viewership as well, because people are actually going to be encouraged to see, Leclerc had a great qualifying session. Oh, why is he started the race in the big race, in P13? Oh, he must have had a howler. I must have missed that. That could have been interesting. So yeah, I think people would be more encouraged to watch the sprints as well, just based on that alone. But, sorry, back to what you were saying.
That's fair. It's also the fact that, for example, if you're low down in the sprint race, for example, you have a bad sprint quali, you're down in 17th, you're a team that's not likely to make it into the points. Usually, you just wouldn't try, would you?
No.
Because if you get into an incident and your car crashes, there is a chance you are out of the main race. Whereas, if you're in, if you know that where you finish today is where you start tomorrow, then that might give the lower teams more of an incentive to push hard and race hard. To try and climb up as much as they can. Obviously, it's just a suggestion. I'm certain they are still pushing hard
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
still trying to get as high as they can, but it also gives a reason for it,
Yeah, and
which I think is good.
especially with obviously what we said a minute ago about the point system, how obviously there's far less points
Mm.
available and for less people. I think to have that incentive for the lower down teams to basically say this is an opportunity to try and get ahead of one another, especially considering how close the midfield seems to be after the first two races this season. I think even the drivers that traditionally in the current sprint format would be completely out of the question for points would have, they'd have that sit down and go, look, I can get ahead of these guys and then I can get a better start for the Grand Prix. And that's where that then puts possibly points on the table for me, and proper championship points because I think I can finish in the top 10 if I do well here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that would be my takeaway from that as well. But
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's fair.
I think just to sort of move on to the next point as well, I think this is another very very solid suggestion in my opinion, and that is just to sort of differentiate the sprints from the main race. Is that instead of having the standing start for the sprints, much like you do with the main Grand Prix, so the line up in the grid, lights out and go, you do a rolling start, which several other racing series do this for their main races as well. You just have to look at the other sort of big open wheel series, which is IndyCar, and see that for all of the race starts on that and all the restarts and everything afterwards, they do rolling starts. And I think that'll add a bit of an extra sort of element of excitement to see the cars sort of come in as they go, considering it's a shorter race as well. Just if anything, just to be something a bit different. But what
Yeah.
thoughts do you have to add about that?
I would say that it's a good idea. I'd be interested to see how it works, and also, I personally think that it wouldn't be as good.
Right.
Mainly from the fact that I think one of the best aspects of Formula One is the standing starts. So much of the chaos, so much of the excitement comes from the opening lap when it's about reaction time.
Yeah.
It's about how quick you are off the line. And even small changes in that can completely change the dynamic
I
of the
mean,
early stages of the race.
we only have to think
And
back.
with
We only have to think back a few races ago when obviously we saw that amazing save from Colapinto to avoid
yeah,
rear-ending
yeah.
Lawson. So it's
Well,
moments like that you get with the standing start.
it's even more stuff like, for example, the sprint at China that's just gone. Antonelli was second on the grid, had an awful start, and so dropped all the way back.
Yeah.
If it was a rolling start, he wouldn't there wouldn't be that loss of concentration. It would just be they're all going full pelt down the straight and just have to fit into the first corner cleanly. And I think it works better for series that have more laps and
Right.
have probably usually less complicated circuits.
Mm.
Whereas I would personally say that a standing start is just it's such a staple of Formula One, and in a sprint where there's not enough time for tyre strategy or things like lifting and coasting on wear to really come into play, I think eliminating another aspect that changes up the racing, being the standing start, kinda isn't gonna improve it. It's just gonna wear it down even more,
Yeah.
because then you're entirely relying on the regulations being or the cars being close enough for there to be a good fight between them, or some kind of mechanical fault or accident to happen.
Yeah, but just to quickly add sort of a point in favour of the rolling start is obviously, especially with these regulations and the difference in sort of turbo sizes, how the smaller turbos that Ferrari are currently using has benefited them in the race starts compared to the bigger turbos of like the Mercedes, for instance. Just sort of adding to that, the backmarker and midfield teams are going to have a much better chance at sort of getting a good start, which means that we will be seeing the entire field, really close together come turn one, which should add for that chaos and drama that I think, obviously, you sort of say in favour of the standing start. Like I say, that's just a sort of devil's advocate point, but I do think, to see, oh, look, the front two cars have made it through all right. oh, but what's this? 3 back markers are going for an overtake at the same time down the inside of 2 other cars. They're about to go 5 wide into turn 1. Something like that. It just would be chaotic, but maybe perhaps not ideal at the same time, because a safety car that early in the race is definitely one way to lose the tension a bit.
Yeah, that's fair. That's reasonable.
Yeah, but I just wanted to quickly mention that at the end.
Yeah, no, fair. Right, moving on to our next one. And this one is actually a submission from our Instagram account. Essentially, we put up a poll on the Instagram account. If you follow us there at Tyre Straits Podcast, if you want to be included in the podcast episodes with your hot takes and opinions. And this is from user Beaumont RS Johnson, which is all the drivers race in a Mariva, a Vauxhall Mariva.
Yes.
Obviously done as a bit of comedy.
Yes.
However, if we spin this in a certain way, I think the idea that the sprint race is done not in Formula One cars, but in some other kind of vehicle, like they did at Brazil and like they did with the Lego cars last year, then that is obviously considerably less sporting. It is entirely more of a PR and fun thing, especially if you give points out for it.
It becomes very clear that it's obviously not F1, and I think points would not be available based on that.
But, no, I don't think points should be available.
No, based on that alone. But what I'd like to say is that aside from that, and obviously the Mariva is the world's greatest car, we've established this. You can tell I drive one. But yeah, no, aside from that, the whole idea is not without precedent. Obviously, you mentioned the sort of the Lego car race and such. But in 1984, you had the Nürburgring Race of Champions, which was basically an event in which a lot of the F1 paddock was invited to race together, and Mercedes-Benz supplied the cars. And they gave each driver an identical Mercedes-Benz 190E. And basically it just meant that for the first time, really, ever at the time, we were seeing like a good chunk of the F1 grid, and not just like backmarker teams and drivers. You had champions, you had Senna, you had Prost, you had Lauda, you had race winners as well in the mix. And they were all driving identical cars. We got to finally see what the grid stacked up as when all driving the same machinery, that whole equal machinery thing. And I think that is definitely a more positive kind of outlook on it, because it's one of those things where it allows you to kind of separate driving ability from just who's got the best car. And obviously, like I said, it's not F1. If we gave everyone a 2000 03 to 2010 Vauxhall or Opel Mariva, and with the same engine size for argument's sake, and put them all on the grid, it's obviously going to be a spectacle in which we will realistically see where all the drivers are at with one another, for the most part. But it isn't F1. They're not driving F1 cars, and I think points would not be available.
It would be very different and definitely more of a PR and kind of media side of thing than it would be an actual
oh my
sporting
God, would it be fun?
But it would be so funny to see them all rip around in a Mariva.
I would love that so much.
It would be, especially because in a wet race, for
example, mate,
pouring down with rain. In fact, you know what? I'd like to see a Mariva try and get up Eau Rouge in the rain.
I will take my car to Spa and I will show you.
But anyway, thank you very much for the submission, Beaumont RS Johnson.
Yes.
And if you want to be included in the podcast like this, then follow us on Instagram.
We'll be putting out.
Make sure to keep an eye out for any further polls.
We'll be putting out polls, questions, all sorts, basically just asking for input, because we do really want to engage with you guys, especially as we, fingers crossed, touching wood, any other sort of luck, as we hopefully grow. It'd be great to be able to stay in tune with the people that are allowing us to do this week in, week out, and, the people that we make this for, basically. So, go and follow us over at Tyre Straits Podcast on Instagram, and get involved next time, But to move things along, we've only got a couple more points to go over in terms of changes. And the first one, just to quickly mention, I would say just sort of more to touch over more than anything else. And that is kind of something we mentioned earlier as well. I thought you kind of alluded to it, is increasing the amount of sprint races. So obviously currently we have 6 sprint races on a 24 race championship. Well, obviously not 24 as of now because of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia being removed. Though, but initially, it was a planned 24 race calendar, and you had a quarter of the races having sprints. Like you say, MotoGP, for instance, and F2, F3, they each have sprints every single round, regardless of them being fewer rounds in the championships that they obviously respectively. But I think even just increasing the number to like 12, so every other race you have a sprint or something like that, just keeps the relevancy of the sprint. Because like you said earlier, with how they were distributed last year as well, you kind of almost forgot that the sprints existed before then you had the last 3 in almost in quick succession after one another. So would you agree sort of 12 is a good number?
I would, if I were to pick a number, I would say 12. I'd say every other round.
Yeah, I think every other race is ideal.
Because I think that you've got to keep it consistent enough so that people remember the sprints are a thing and an active part of the championship. Because at the moment, you don't remember too much who has won what sprint and what's going on with that. Whereas you remember who wins every race. But for example, if you've got 12 of them in a season proposed, then you can kind of remember it a bit better because it's its own, half of the season is going to be affected by the sprint races. And that's a considerable larger amount of points as well being given out from the sprint races, so it matters more to do well in them.
But one last sort of point before we give our own quick verdicts on what we would change ourselves is to have, alongside the main F1 championship, to have a separate sort of sprint championship. So points available for the sprints specifically. And then obviously at the end of the season, you crown a sprint champion as well as, the main drivers champion, which means obviously sprint points are not going towards the main drivers championship and vice versa. So what would you sort of take away from that idea?
I wouldn't be completely against it. The idea of keeping the sprints as a separate thing, because then the difference between the actual the number of them becomes less of an issue, but it does begin to stray towards the idea of it being more of a media and PR thing than an actual racing event for the sport.
Yeah.
So there definitely need to be a lot of debate on what the actual reward or repercussions of sprints and sprint championships, and then also if it's a completely different sprint championship, you risk the issue that someone might total their car in a sprint race and then not be able to race in the main Grand Prix, which would, is the considerably more important thing to do well in the Grand Prix. So if you've wasted it for a completely different championship, it kind of becomes pointless to try to.
Not unless you're out of the drivers' championship and and you have a shot at the sprint championship.
Oh, yeah,
but I guess that would lead to some sort of levels of desperation as well.
Yeah,
but what you said a minute ago has just given me an idea, and I will save it for a minute because I am going to include it in what I have to sort of say about my personal ideas of what I'd do to change the sprints. But
interesting, very fair, very fair.
I'll get to it and I'll say when. But is there anything else you'd like to sort of briefly discuss before we give our own verdicts?
I think that's about it.
Okay, so hit me then. In that case, what would you change about the sprints just quickly before we move along?
If I were to change the sprints, I would do a reverse grid. Like in F2 or F3, I'd do a reverse grid and it's based on just the one qualifying session. I would increase points going down to P10.
Right.
But it would be 10 for first, 1 point for 10th.
Yeah.
And then I would increase the amount of sprint races, I think is what I would change.
Okay.
Increase it up to 12.
Yeah.
I can see that people may have issues with the fact that getting P10 in both the main, P9 and P10 would be unchanged between sprint and main race. So
Right.
I could maybe see leaving the points unchanged, like just leaving it down to P8. But I'd like to see it P10 personally, just to at least
Yeah.
try it for a year, and then things can be tweaked.
Yeah. I think, just to get onto my ideas, I too would increase to 12 races. I think every other Grand Prix weekend have a sprint. If we're going through this angle of we are trying to fix the sprints rather than just scrap them, then yeah, definitely every other week retain their relevancy and try to have them occurring at the sort of the better venues for it as well. But what I'd really change is I would go the other way, the sort of the other main route, and I'd reintroduce the finishing order for the sprint rule.
Yeah.
And I think that would make for some interesting sort of strategy calls, basically. Because like I said, I feel like that galvanizes teams that are further back, who maybe don't have the performance in qualifying, but have a bit better in the race to, try and push and get a better starting point. Because that way, while there aren't points available for the sprint, what that does encourage is then, drivers and teams, like a team like Cadillac can go, we've got no chance of qualifying anywhere near the top 10 at this race, let's just say for argument's sake, but our race pace is good. If we can battle up through this sprint, then we could start towards the sort of top of the back 12 cars, and we could possibly be on for points this race, and that gives them that championship opportunity to fight in the mix. And I think that's my main reason for that. But the other thing that like one last thing I'd tack on, and this kind of, I will admit, doesn't really mix with the point I've just made about the finishing order for the sprint being the start order for the Grand Prix. But when we mentioned the separate sprint championship and sort of having that separate, I think what would be good is, like I say, it doesn't necessarily mix because it would require the same driver to finish the sprint to then start the Grand Prix. But obviously, we have a sort of rule in F1 where certain practice sessions for each team, they have to put in a younger or less experienced driver, one of their reserve drivers, anything like that. I think having them feature in the sprint race would be a better way to expose them to the racing of Formula One, a better way to expose them to a larger audience, and also a better way to give them confidence in the seat as well. Because if you think, like, there is going to come a time when Alonso, Hamilton, Hülkenberg, they're going to retire. Don't you want their replacements to have just a bit of race experience in F1, knowing how the machinery handles and sort of being able to battle with the others as well? I think having the opportunity to throw in your younger drivers and let them race on behalf of whoever's car they're taking, and then, have the corresponding driver then line up on for the GP the next day, wherever that young driver got them. I think that would be a great way to sort of also make the sprints their own thing, to give them their own identity, and to sort of make them this kind of almost sort of talent kind of generator, if that makes sense, where it exposes the audience to these guys that are going to be in F1 eventually, and gives those guys likewise a chance to get kind of used to F1. So that kind of came to me as we were discussing a minute ago, but I heard you sort of oohing there. Was that a good ooh or a bad ooh?
That was an interesting ooh.
Okay.
In the sense that that's a good thought. Though I do have a couple of questions.
Yeah,
essentially
go ahead.
being, one, the points they score in the sprint, obviously they don't go towards the driver, because
they wouldn't score points in the sprint.
Okay, it would just
be for the it would basically be the opportunity for points comes like from the main race, but they are fighting to get further ahead in the start for the main race.
Okay. And then the other one that I would say is it does bring the issue of if a driver completely totals a car, the person who originally owns the car now cannot race.
Yeah, that's the main sort of, I will admit, like I say, and like I say, it also doesn't really match very well with the whole finishing order kind of thing. because like you could have a young driver come in, and obviously being young and inexperienced, they absolutely honk it. But you know, that's the nature of it. And obviously, like I say, I feel like this is a team choice thing as well. I feel like it should be something that is encouraged and given as an opportunity, but not something that's going to be forced either. Like, you've got an important championship weekend towards the end of the season, and you get Ferrari, like, let's say Lewis is like 20 points behind Russell, and Ferrari says, right, Lewis, we're giving your car to Arthur Leclerc here. And he's like, well, I qualified P1, you know? If I hold my position, then I can take that into the race. And then, like, for example, obviously Arthur maybe honks it in that race. It's like,
it's like
I do
Mercedes
understand what you're saying.
Or like Merck have a tight inter-team battle between Kimi and Russell.
Yeah.
And then you've got the bigger issue of like
favoritism,
one of them,
which driver like, gets swapped out.
They're going to have to give like Vesti or whoever their junior is a go of like in the sprint. And the question is, whose car do they get?
Yeah.
And will they slam it into the wall?
Yeah. It's definitely, I think, an idea worth exploring, and maybe not necessarily one conducive with my finishing order change. That's the main one for me. The finishing order for the sprint is the start order for the Grand Prix. But I do like the idea of giving the opportunity for the junior drivers to actually make an F1 race start for themselves. I think with a bit of tweaking, we could have some good ideas generated here. And
I think maybe they should do that at the end of the season.
Maybe
like an Abu Dhabi post-season race that with like because the cars will be done by that point.
I mean,
so
like,
it's not as important.
You do get non-championship rounds in like other racing series as well. So to have a whole race that's dedicated to like the juniors, where each team has to put in at least one junior driver in one of their F1 cars, that could be quite interesting to see. But I think that kind of concludes what we have to say about the Formula One sprints.
Yeah, we've collected some good ideas. We've had some good discussions about what works and what don't. And I think overall we can say that
something needs to change.
Well, maybe not quite that far yet. But something needs to change. But the question is, what is such huge debate?
Just with that concluding remark in mind, if you guys have any sort of suggestions of your own, things you think we missed, things that you think you would change that would be better than what we would change, by all means, please leave a comment on the YouTube, leave a comment on the Spotify, leave a comment on our Instagram, because we post after every episode anyway. So by all means, just hit us with something that makes it obviously, engage with us, because we would love to engage with you. But with that being said, we can finally put the F1 sprints behind us for now, and at least until Miami, and discuss what's been going on in the world of motorsport more broadly. Now, I'd just like to start quickly with the NASCAR Cup Series. We had the Goodyear 400 at Darlington just yesterday, which was won by Tyler Reddick, who managed to do so in spite of the fact that he was having quite a massive battery issue. His alternator was basically not working properly, not charging the battery, and it meant that he had to run without several things, including air conditioning, which NASCAR Cup Series cars do include, especially considering they are obviously enclosed cockpits. You're going to sweat in there. So they do have air conditioning, but Tyler Reddick did not. His air conditioning was not... He had to turn it off to avoid basically running out of electricity. But... aside from that, I can't really say, just from having watched it, that it was the most eventful race. But just to quickly sort of go through a quick honours list, basically, it was a strong show from Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney, and Carson Hocevar, who rounded out the top 5 at the end there. So, I think definitely going to be interested to see where Reddick's form is in Martinsville, which is the next race of the season. But until then... only time will tell. So if I hand over to you now.
Indeed. I did actually watch some of the highlights for the Goodyear 400. And it was alternator shorting, and even like his first stage pit stop, Reddick had a really slow one.
Yeah, they had some trouble with the I think it was the right rear tyre, trying to get it off.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where he managed to come back from that I think also helps that Ryan Blaney, I don't think, has had a good pit stop this entire season so far. So yeah, he was complaining about that down the radio actually. So even his close competition, I believe Ryan Blaney's now 95 points behind Tyler Reddick. So even his closest competition is going to be a little bit further away if things continue like this.
I was going to say, for reference, for people who do not watch the NASCAR Cup Series, they have considerably more points.
Yeah, there are far more points available.
95 is not that big a gap.
No. So yeah, but with that being said, what do you have to add about the wonderful world of motorsports this week?
I have to talk about 2 series for the moment, but to start off with, MotoGP. They have, both these motor series actually have gone to a brand new circuit for them. And for MotoGP, it is in Brazil. They've gone to the Goiânia circuit, I think it's pronounced, or the Goiânia circuit. And it is thoroughly nothing.
Right.
It's a very bland circuit. Atmosphere is great with it being Brazil. Brazilian crowds are brilliant as always. But the actual track itself is really not that great for racing. And there had been a major delay on the sprint due to a sinkhole that formed in the track.
Right.
And a torrential downpour during practice led to some crazy names getting into Q2. Essentially the way that MotoGP's qualifying works is they have one open practice session. They then have a second main practice, it's 2 open practice sessions. Right. One main practice, which sets the top 12 times or top 10 times from the open practice goes straight into Q2, and then qualifying you've got Q1 and the top 3 people from Q1 go through into Q2, and it continues from there, or top 4 I think, I can't remember. Ugh. Anyway, off the top of my head, I really need to write some more of this down. My brain is frying. But the sprint was won by Marc Marquez. There's nothing really to comment about. Main GP was won by Marco Bezzecchi. The main thing to mention is just how strong the Aprilia bike looks at the moment. Ducati had a monstrous year last year with Marquez, and it seems... Oh, excuse me. He's fallen back a fair bit.
Right.
He's not managing to hold up. And it's possibly because of the bike. We'll have to wait until it gets to a track that's more conducive, from the fact that Thailand has always been quite a strong Aprilia track in the last couple of years. And then this track is completely brand new, so anything could happen, really. And it just seems that the Ducati is not holding up. So we'll have to wait probably until Kota to see if Marquez can truly pull it out of the bag. But in other news, it's fantastic to see Martin back at the top after his woeful injury season last year. It's good to see him back and in form, getting a P2, so Aprilia 1-2. And the other Aprilia bike of Ayagura in P5 for his Trackhouse is really nice to see. I like Ayagura. It's a shame that he had a bit of a mixed season last year, but it seems he's coming into his own, especially with the improvement to the Aprilia. So we'll just have to see how the season goes, but it is very much looking like Bezzecchi is the favourite to win the championship going forward. And is now also the 5th MotoGP rider ever to win 4 Grand Prix in a row.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is very promising.
Quite a statistic.
Yeah, considering that the other all of the other people who hold that title are world champions, it's a pretty good one to hold. And then the other thing I have to talk about is the Madrid Prix. It was the first race at Jarama, which a circuit used to have Formula 1 race there, and they've gone there with MotoGP? Sorry, Formula E, where it was mainly because they did testing there last year after the Valencia track flooded, and they've now brought it in to give it a shot, and I think it needs to stay. It is brilliant to see a proper, fully formed track on the calendar that works so well. They had the Miami circuit earlier, which was okay, and like some of the other tracks have been fine, but this is probably the best race of this season for how close it has been. A brilliant charge from Evans climbing up from P16 to P2. It was great to see DaCosta get another win. And a 1-2 for Jag. Really, really fun to see. Always a big Jaguar fan.
Absolutely.
And there were I don't know, it was just a lot of tight fights. It was good. Really enjoyable. And the end up podium being DaCosta, Evans, and Verline is quite spicy for the championship, as it closes all the gaps together at the front.
That's what we like to hear. So
Indeed.
yeah, there is plenty going on in the motorsports world. If you're obviously only sort of interested in Formula One, I cannot sort of encourage you enough to sort of branch out and just see what motorsports has to offer you. Because there are plenty of series, plenty of divisions, and plenty to sink your teeth into. But,
the waffling does not do it justice. These are all great series.
But to put that past us, we just have one last order of business to get through before we close up the show tonight, and that is obviously next week we see the Japanese Grand Prix in Suzuka. Well, this week technically, as of when we record. Yeah, we record on a Monday, after the Sunday. So basically, every week prior to a race weekend, we will make some predictions about that race, and then on the episode just after that race, we'll review our predictions and see who came out on top. But we have 4 categories that we make predictions for, and basically those are who we think is going to be the race winner, who we think is going to be our race binner, and then who is going to be the flop of the tops. That's basically which driver from a top team is going to have a bad race. And then we also have a wild card prediction at the end. So do you want to start us off here?
I'm more than welcome to. I shall start off with the race winner. And for me, I have gone for Charles Leclerc. I think that it's going to be a non-Mercedes win. I'm mainly thinking this from an incident that may occur between the two Mercs.
Oh, 2016 Spain.
I'm thinking something along those lines. With all the tight S's and stuff like that, there's bound to be some point where there's bound to be some race where they collide. I think it's going to happen early. Considering how close Russell and Kimi already are, I think that it's going to come to a head quite soon. So Leclerc for victory, and you have gone for?
I've gone for Charles Leclerc as well. I couldn't agree more, really. I can definitely see there being a 2016 Spain incident, sort of like I chimed in a minute ago. But that's not really why I put Leclerc. I think Ferrari has been showing some genuine pace, obviously kind of overshadowed by the Mercs. But at a track that's more winding, like Suzuka, I think that's going to benefit the Ferrari engine design a bit more. Because for those who don't know, basically Mercedes and most of the other teams are running basically a bigger turbo on their engine, which is better at high revs, which is what's giving them such crazy straight line speed. But the Ferrari has a smaller turbo, which is better at low revs, which is what's basically given the Ferrari such a great launch off the line in the race starts. But it's also what benefits them through sort of corners, especially lower speed corners. And I think with Suzuka having a lot of twists, a lot of bends, sort of like you said earlier with the S's, that's going to give Ferrari a real opportunity to have some genuine pace here. And I think they will demonstrate that masterfully, and we will see a Charles Leclerc victory. So that's my point of view. But do you want to take us on a more sour note to your race binner?
Race binner, and my race binner is going to be Esteban Ocon. I think it's going to have a bad weekend, and I just think in total, I think it's going to have a bad quali. I think his actual maiden race is going to go poorly. I don't think he's going to retire. I just think he's going to be at the back doing nothing the whole race. That kind of bad weekend.
Okay. Well, to sort of try and be a little bit more pushing the boat out. I, for race binner, have put Oscar Piastri. Now, this is not me willing it into existence, because obviously I do like Oscar and I would like him to in fact prove me wrong. But the fact remains, through no fault of his own, well, maybe with one of the incidents at least, he's not yet started a race in 2026. And I think, he's obviously driven in the practice sessions, he's driven in the qualifying sessions, but in terms of actual racing, he has not actually had a feel for the McLaren car this year. And I think that's going to result in some kind of incident, some kind of accident, something that's going to cause him to spin out, crash, maybe even destroy the car. And like I say, I'm not sort of willing it into existence, but that's just what I can see happening, basically. So that is my race binner. But if you want to once again take the lead and go through your flop of the tops.
Of course, and my flop of the tops is Antonelli. And this is going to be based on the fact that I think the two Mercs are going to collide, but I think Russell will have a better quali. I think Russell will only escape because he'll beat Antonelli to pole, but the two of them will then collide in the race. And I'd say the pole position gives Russell that tiniest little step above.
Right. On the other end of the scale, I've put Max Verstappen. Once again, not something that I'm kind of willing to exist, nor something I think I'd have ever predicted before this season. But just with the current reliability issues that he's been having in the Red Bull, and honestly, the luck as well, or lack thereof, I can very easily see Max finding himself maybe not even in the points at this race, or perhaps not even finishing. So, I've like I say, once again, I don't really want it to happen, personally, but I can definitely see it happening, so that's why I've put Max. But one more for luck, we have the wild cards. So do you want to start us off one more time?
I shall indeed. And for wild cards, I have gone for pole position does not win this race. As you can see, I am pretty much banking on the collision.
I see, you've gone all in.
Yeah, but considering the last
All
two
on
races,
black.
pole position has won. And I'm pretty sure that the year before there was a good chunk of the races where pole ended up taking the win.
Yeah.
So I think that just having the pole doesn't win is a nice. Yeah, it may be a little bit of a scammy point to get, but we shall see.
Yeah.
All it takes is someone stick it on pole and then fuck off with the lead, and there you go.
Yeah, no, to close things off, I have predicted a double podium for Ferrari. I think, now that you've sort of mentioned a Mercedes crash, I think that's possible. But also, like I said about my prediction for Leclerc, I think that Ferrari are going to have genuine pace in Suzuka. Just based off of obviously the strengths of their car and the nature of the Suzuka circuit. And I think that whether it's Hamilton P2 or P3, I don't dare say. I think both Ferraris I think Leclerc will win, and I think Hamilton will take either of the other two steps. So that's my prediction at least. And thus is the conclusion of not only our predictions, but this week's episode of the podcast. Have you any closing remarks, sir?
Closing remarks. Something needs to change about the sprint races. Not quite certain what, but I'm certain that things need to at least be tweaked at the very least. And looking forward to Suzuka. Should be good. Hopefully the new cars actually make this circuit a bit more enjoyable to watch, because it's not been great the past couple of years.
Aye, and we're kind of left waiting until then. But please do join us next week for that, when we discuss and review the Japanese Grand Prix. And of course, please, if you have got this far, subscribe to the podcast, whether that's on YouTube or Spotify. That really helps us out. Obviously, lets you get involved as well, makes it easier. You'll know when we post and upload. And also follow us on Instagram at Tyre Straits Podcast. Once again, it gives you the opportunity to engage with us and sort of have a voice in every episode as we go forwards. That's really what we'd like to do, especially if things start to gain a bit of traction, which would be nice. But hopefully that's not just wishful thinking. But with all that being said, like I say, it's until next week from us. So I bid you all adieu, and we'll see you next week.
Indeed. That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.